So what is the difference between a board game experience and a role-playing game experience? And for the sake of this vlog, we're going to pull in and narrow it down to a Dungeons & Dragons classic dungeon adventure versus a dungeon crawler type board game, maybe like Hero Quest or Bard Sung. Those are two titles literally right now on my gaming table. I'm running some Hero Quest stuff, solo, exploring some different things, kind of where it started back in the day. And literally next to it is Bard Sung, having fun making my way through that system and exploring that. So an RPG versus a board game experience. Now, the holy grail of board games, in my opinion, if we're looking at it from dungeon crawlers or fantasy type based, well, we could throw in like Runebound and stuff like that, is to be able to discover the unknown. Meaning I'm going into a quest. I kind of have a vague idea because there's a background story, but I'm going to be confronted with interesting choices. I'm going to have character development. Things are going to happen. And in making those decisions, hopefully heroic and glory happens, heroism and glory. But at the end of the game, I'm going to try and win. Not that you can win an RPG, but you kind of can. I'm going to try and get that experience and see how the story plays out, making those choices. Now, from a role-playing perspective, the engine was the dungeon master, computing all of these options and things and dealing with questions, essentially unlimited questions. I mean, in D&D, it might not be a very good choice or an optimal choice, but you can almost kind of do anything you want, depending on your ability through magic and level to bend the physics of the game. But it's up to you. How do you want to handle these monsters? Talk, run, fight, a little bit of both, bluff. I mean, the dungeon master in that moment, even though there's rules for it and skill checks and dice, makes these decisions and determines the reaction. Compared to a board game, it has the appearance, I say appearance, of being very linear. Now, the Holy Grail has always been to capture that RPG experience in a board game. And the only one that I know that has really from my collection and when I played that has managed to achieve that, but at significant cost. And I'm not talking about like financial cost. Magic Realm. Magic Realm really is all that. And I think I'm only playing it about 80% correct. Magic Realm feels like a role-playing, immersive, kind of classic AD&D experience. But the price that comes at is the rule set. There is a logic behind it, but it is very complex. It requires significant investment of learning the rules, learning the flow. I mean, this is the type of game that you sit down and you play 10 or 15 times, and you kind of have an idea what's going on. It's very, very complex. But from a board game to role-playing game perspective, with how things spawn and how things interact and the things you can do, it has that feeling. It really does. The difference between a board gaming experience. Now, there's ways that a board game can approach the illusion. I say the illusion, right? Use your illusion of a role-playing game is by offering choices, by randomly mixing things up and pushing that out there. But ultimately, even some games that give you a lot of choices, different things you can do, you can't do just anything or everything. The trade-off in a good way, though, is a board game is a self-contained module, meaning I take that off the shelf. I take Runebound off the shelf, core. Put the expansions aside for a moment. I've got 6 characters to pick from. I've got 2 stories. I can face the Dragon Lord or I can face the Necromancer. There's going to be side quests. There's going to be items to buy. There's going to be things to explore, choices to make. The engine runs by itself. I'm going to have, if I'm playing solo, an experience in the game for, 2 hours or so and really play it. I'm going to get that experience. I didn't have to do any preparation or really do anything specific other than running the box, playing the box. From a Dungeons & Dragons perspective, you need a dungeon master. And that dungeon master or the role master or the GM, the game master, they put a lot into it, right? They put a lot into running that module, even if I pull that module off the shelf. And it's one that I've run many times. I've got some adventures that I consistently run. I mean, I can almost do them by memory. But there is some prep work in that. I don't just take it down and play it. and then also in the moment being able to interpret and figure out what players want to do. So that, in my mind, is the primary trade-off. The primary difference between the two is freedom of choice and length of play. But it's not like board games, no freedom of choice, and they play fast. Some of them are very complex, but again, the engine runs itself versus kind of an open, fully formed RPG type experience where, for better or worse, you kind of can do anything you want. You can make those choices for your character. Of course, realize you're playing with the rest of the party and other players have significant time invested in that. So exploring that challenge. Now, an area where things are kind of blending, and this is kind of new, this is kind of interesting. Board games that have a companion type app and pull in that experience where the app becomes kind of a kind of autopilot dungeon master. And I'm not talking about like getting into AI and stuff like that yet. I mean, at some point we will have AI-based adventures and AI-based board games other than just a fancy dressed up decision tree that it's making. But if you look at this, some of these newer board games that are coming out that are app supported or app driven, running it, it's built into the environment and the system. You can't play the game without it. Putting aside my thoughts on that tech for a moment, that's a self-contained experience, but it's easy to push updates. It's easy to code stuff. It's easier to put in random stuff. You're not limited by physical components. Yes, someone still has to design it and play test it, but you're not locked into physical components to drive the adventure. Now we're starting to see, I mean, it's really interesting. We're starting to see kind of maybe what Magic Realm was first trying to do in a very analog way. Now in a kind of digital hybrid way where we can have a board game experience, pull it down, set it up, play it, but the choices are more, the options are more, the quests are more. It's starting to really replicate almost that D&D-like-esque experience. Your thoughts on that?